right, hello again. Welcome back. So in the previous video, I showed you how to create a single line graph. I also talked about how it's important that you have these actual data points. Excel calls them markers, that you have these actual data points plotted in your graph, because without them, and if you just have a smooth line here, a person reading your graph might assume that you have an infinite set of data points all along that line there. So by including those markers, you're telling the reader that in fact you only have data points at those given locations. So today I'm going to show you how to create a line graph that has multiple lines. So we use line graphs to show how something changes over time or a trend in a set of data. We use bar graphs to make comparisons between things. What a multiple line graph is going to allow us to do is make comparisons and show trends. So I've already got a sheet set up down here with some data already included. And what this is it's a fictional student named John Smith, and what he wants to do is create a line graph that shows how his grades in science, math, and language arts have been changing for the first 6 weeks of school. So just like with all of the previous graphs, the first thing that we want to do is highlight the data that we want to be in the graph itself. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of these three data sets here. And then I'm going to go up to the green tab here that says Insert. And I'm going to select our line graph. And I'm going to use the same one that I used before, line graph with markers, because I want to have those data points included. And here's our graph. Looks like a pretty good start, but as always, we do need to make a few changes. And the first thing I'm going to do is click on the little plus symbol here so that I can bring up this submenu here and include the axis titles. Without axis titles or axis labels, your graph is pretty much incomplete. I'm going to go ahead now and give this a much better title than just chart title. And I'm just going to call it the same thing that I titled the data table itself, which is Weekly Grade Progress for John Smith. I also need to change these axes titles here. So I'm going to change the y-axis, and I'm going to call this his earned percentage, because those values there, are percentage values. And then I'm going to change this title so that it is week number, because he is tracking his grades by week. So week 1, 2, 3, all the way to week 6. Now the next thing that I need to do is I need to change the legend down here, because as it is right now, Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, that doesn't tell me anything. Series 1 happens to be science, Series 2 is math, and Series 3 is language arts. So this is a point here where I want to stop and make sure that something is very clear to everybody. I can't tell you how often I get graphs where students leave these things exactly as shown here. And they turn in a graph that has 3 lines or 4 lines or 2 lines or however many lines, and the legend just says Series 1 and Series 2 and so on. That doesn't mean anything to me. Without a complete legend, that connects those lines to the correct data sets, your graph is incomplete. So just as before, I'm going to go ahead and click on the graph and click on the legend itself. When I click on the legend itself, it highlights just that element within the graph. And I'm going to use my right mouse button. We've done a lot of right mouse clicking. And it brings up a submenu. And I'm going to select data for my legend. And in this box, you can clearly see why Excel is calling those 3 lines Series 1, 2, and 3, because that's what's shown here in the box. So what I need to do is I need to click on Series 1. I'm going to go ahead and edit it, and I'm going to click on Science here so that it changes it to Science. Now, one of the things I want to show you is what's actually happening is I'm going to do one more, Series 2. I click Edit. And I click Math, and what it's doing here in this box is it's saying that it is pulling whatever is in Sheet 2, cell A5, and that's exactly what is right here in the box. Sheet 2, down here, cell A5 has the word math in it, so when I click OK, that's why it says math down here at the bottom. So I'll do the final series here, and I'm going to edit that. There's another way that I can do this. I can actually just type it right there like that, and I say okay, and it changes it to language arts for me as well. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One is simply by typing in exactly what you want it to say, and then the second way is just by clicking on the cell that you want to have the data pulling from. All right. So we're looking pretty good here. I do want to make a couple of changes though that are more aesthetic than anything. And this is going to make it much easier for the reader of this graph to be able to see how John Smith's grades are changing in those classes. One of them has to do with this axis over here. As you can see, it's ranging all the way from 100% down to 0%. Now, he doesn't have any grades that are below 60%. As a matter of fact, his lowest grade was in week 3 in math. It was 66%. So that means there's going to be a whole bunch of dead space down here. All of that dead space means that these three lines are going to be overlapping with each other very, very closely, making it a lot harder to see how they're changing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the axis scale over here so that it doesn't go below 60. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to click on the axis values itself. I'm going to use my trusty right click again. And I'm going to do Format Axis. And when I click on Format Axis, it brings up these axes options here. And you can see why it's going all the way down to 0. Excel is assuming that 0 is the bottom number. I want to change the bottom number to 60. And I'm going to go ahead and leave 100 as the top value there. And now I have these lines that are still showing the exact same values they would have done before, but now they're allowing you to see the lines a little bit more easily. Now, there's one other thing that I want to do aesthetically with this graph. And in order to show you that, I'm going to go for just a moment back to our original single line graph. Now, in this graph, I, as the graph maker, decided that I wanted to have all of these data points connected. I could have left it as a scatter plot if I wanted to and just left the data points there, but I wanted to make it easy for whoever's looking at this graph to see what's going on with John's heart rate. That it starts off at a certain value, and within the first half of the time showing, his heart rate increases, and then in the second half or so, his heart rate begins to decrease. So by connecting those data points, I can illustrate what's going on with John Smith's heart rate really easily. But in this example, what I want to do here is I actually want to remove the lines that are connecting each of those data points. So here's how I'm going to do that. I'll start off with the science line. I'm going to click on this. Notice I've got just the science line highlighted, and you can tell over here in the data table that I'm just adjusting the science line. I'm going to go over here to my Format Data Series paint bucket here, because this is what's going to allow me to change sort of the aesthetics of that line. So I'm going to click on the paint bucket, and the easiest thing to do is simply click No Line. And when I click away, you can see that now his science grade is just a bunch of blue dots. I'm going to do the same thing with math. So click on the paint bucket, tell it No Line, and then I'm going to do the same thing with language arts. Click on the line, and then remove the line. Now I have a scatter plot here that makes it actually temporarily a little bit harder to see the trend. So here's how I'm going to finalize this graph. I'm going to go ahead and select the science line again, well, the science data points again, and I'm going to do a right mouse click button. Now that I've got them selected, do a right click button, and I'm going to add a trend line. And it's super easy, just like that. And look what I have here. I have a blue dotted line that is increasing over time. So it looks like John Smith is doing pretty well in his science class. Started off maybe a little lower than he'd hoped for, but he's on an upward trend. So nice job, John. I'll do the same thing with math. I'm going to right click so that I can add a trend line. And wow, John is really consistent with his math class. It looks like it hasn't really changed at all. Little data points of ups and downs, but the trend is he's very consistent with math. Then I'll do the final same thing with language arts. Right click, add trend line, and well, well, looks like he maybe needs to spend a little bit more time maybe reading the novels that he's supposed to be reading in language arts. Now, another thing that I just want to show you real quick before I finish here, I'm going to hide the data table there for a second because I'm going to go ahead and expand this graph. When you expand the graph, Excel automatically readjusts the dimensions of the graph so that now it should be obvious that you can see those trend lines even easier than before. If I shrink it down, it makes it impossible to see because it can't plot the data properly. So make sure when you're creating these graphs and then you're inserting them into Word documents so that you can submit them, make sure that the graph is big enough that whoever's reading it, like me, has a good idea of what your graph is showing. All right, I think that does it for our multiple line graphs. I'm going to show you in a later video how to create really simple pie charts. And then in another video, I will show you how you can take a bar graph and turn it into a histogram. All right, until next time, take care.